So we are very excited today. We have Jacqueline from the Xerces Society. They have been doing some really interesting work in Albuquerque around pollinators. And when I heard the briefing, I thought it was really useful information for us to all have. And I knew that my constituents would want to hear this. So I asked her to come, and she was kind enough to give us an hour of her time. So I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline and let her go through all the information she has. And if you have questions, hold them till the end. We'll have a Q&A at the end. Thank you so much for being here, Jacqueline. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Counselor, and thank you to everyone for being online today, or if you're watching the recording. And thank you for sharing your favorite butterfly and favorite flower. My favorite butterfly, I would probably say, is the juniper hair streak. I love those wings and how they sort of shift colors. And I love any type of goldenrod that I see and all the pollinators it attracts. And it was so lovely to hear all of your favorites as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get some slides going. How does that look to everyone? Are you able to see my slides? Awesome. Thank you for the thumbs up there. So my name is Jacqueline Buenrostro. I work for the pesticide reduction team at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And my role is essentially to help communities around New Mexico and around the country reduce their pesticide use and enhance their efforts for protecting pollinators. And so to give a little bit of background on what I'm going to be talking about today before I dive right in, is we know that towns and cities, just like Albuquerque, have this really incredible potential to serve as pollinator habitat, and in particular, habitat for butterflies. But we also know that pesticides can really diminish the quality of that habitat and even make that habitat less safe for butterflies or contribute to butterfly declines, which we'll talk a little bit about today. And so we did this study in Albuquerque testing for pesticide residues on pollinator plants to get a better sense of that state of urban habitat for butterflies, because we didn't have a good sense of what that looked like before. And so today I'm really excited to be sharing what we learned from that research with you all, to help us bring butterfly conservation home and enhance our pollinator conservation efforts, really from city parks to your own backyard, because we do believe that every single person can be a champion for butterfly conservation. And so just to give a little bit of background about our organization, in case you are less familiar with us, here at the Xerces Society, our mission is to protect the natural world through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. And so what this looks like is essentially we are a collection of bug nerds and bug scientists working throughout North America on projects that range from establishing new habitat to working with agricultural growers, maybe assessing the status of at-risk invertebrate species, or like my role, helping folks reduce their pesticide use. So we were founded in 1971. And our name comes from the now extinct Xerces blue butterfly, which you are seeing pictured there. And I do want to just quickly thank our supporters, because without all of our wonderful, wonderful supporters, we could not do the work that we do. So thank you to all of our Xerces Society supporters. So first of all, I just want to highlight that New Mexico is an absolute hotspot for butterfly diversity. This is, I think, just such an incredible statistic. New Mexico has nearly 350 different species of butterflies. Now, I can't name them all off the top of my head, but we have some iconic ones like the monarch butterfly, we have the West Coast lady, the large marble butterfly, plus a bunch that you all mentioned today. And so what this really means is that there is an amazing opportunity here in New Mexico and here in the Southwest to plant pollinator habitat that makes a very big impact because of the many, many diverse species that stand to benefit. And why are we talking about butterflies here today? Why aren't we talking about bees or some of the other pollinators? Well, butterflies are actually very important pollinators, and I think they're maybe a little underappreciated in that regard. They're very important for pollinating our crops in our agricultural areas, our plants and our natural ecosystems and open spaces. And butterflies actually provide hundreds of millions of dollars in pollination to our agricultural sector. They are also a very important food source for birds and other wildlife, as we see from this robin here that's feeding her babies on caterpillars. It's estimated that 96% of North American birds actually rely on insects for food. And we know that caterpillars are a very important source of that insect food. And I think it's also important to mention, too, that butterflies are just a source of wonder and joy for people. They get people outside and exploring the world around them. And I think that butterflies have drawn a lot of people into this practice of gardening to support butterflies and other pollinators. And I know that speaking for myself, I can't help but smile when I see a butterfly, going by outside, or when I see a caterpillar munching away on a plant. The bad news here is that we are losing butterflies. Populations and species are declining. And so nationwide, around the country, we have lost 22% of our butterflies in the 20 years from 2000 to 2020. And so what this means is that for every 5 butterflies you saw outside in 2000, nowadays you would only see 4. And so when we look at the Southwest region, that trend is even more pronounced. So while that nationwide number was 22%, in the Southwest region, that decline is actually 37%. And so that would be roughly equivalent to, for every 3 butterflies you saw outside in 2000 in the Southwest, nowadays you would actually see less than 2 butterflies. And one of the more prominent examples of these declines is the painted lady butterfly, which you're seeing pictured there, whose abundance has declined by 49% in that same time period in the Southwest region. So pretty steep declines here. And so I think the big questions from this are, first, why are we losing butterflies? And second, what can we do about it? Because I will say just from the start here that there are things that everyone can do to stop and even reverse butterfly declines. But first, we'll go over why they're declining. So I think with many types of ecological harm, we have kind of the usual suspects here: climate change, habitat loss, and in particular for butterflies, pesticides, and especially insecticides, ones that are actually meant to target and kill insects, are particularly harmful. But while this is one of the major drivers of declines, it is a very reversible one if we all work together to decrease pesticide risks and decrease our use. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes focusing on pesticides. So first, to give us an idea of just how pervasive pesticides can be throughout a butterfly's life cycle. So if a plant has pesticides applied to it, or maybe if that plant is in a pesticide-free park or garden, it might have pesticides drift in from somewhere else, because we know that this does happen. That plant is going to be contaminated, and that can be harmful to a butterfly really throughout its life cycle. So let's start with the butterfly here. That butterfly is, drinking nectar from those flowers. If that butterfly is sprayed directly, it can be harmed. Or if that nectar is contaminated, that can harm the butterfly. Once that butterfly lays its eggs, those eggs can be harmed if they're sprayed directly. Once that caterpillar is munching away on that plant, it can be harmed, again, if it's sprayed directly, or if that plant has contamination from, a previous application that happened. And then finally, the chrysalis can also be exposed. And so this contamination can be enough to kill or harm a butterfly at any point in its life cycle. And butterflies are really particularly susceptible because of all these different exposure pathways that happen throughout its life cycle. And so, with this in mind, the scientists at the Xerces Society were hoping to learn about the state of butterfly habitat in urban areas. And we landed on this partnership with Albuquerque because of the incredible conservation potential of this city. It's a city that's already doing really amazing work in this area, with opportunities to continue expanding and doing that great work. And so during sampling, you're seeing some of the pictures from that sampling effort. Xerces staff were, up at dawn every day, gathering the leaves of plants that are used by caterpillars to develop into butterflies. And then those leaves were sent to a lab and tested for pesticide residues. And so plants were tested from both public parks and private gardens throughout the city. And I'm sad that this sampling happened before I started with the Xerces Society, because I've heard from my coworkers that it was such a wonderful time visiting Albuquerque, meeting some amazing people, and seeing some really beautiful parks that you have here. And so all in all, this project helped us identify what pesticides were found and where, what that means for risks to butterflies, and how we can use that information to help you all improve conservation efforts throughout Albuquerque. So jumping into what we found here. So we sampled 155 pollinator plants throughout the city in 5 public parks and 5 privately managed gardens that folks gave us, volunteered to give us permission to sample there. The public parks were Albuquerque Riverside Drain, Arroyo del Oso Park, Mariposa Basin Park, North Domingo Baca Park, and Tingley Beach. And we sampled plants in 9 different genera, so 9 different types of plants. And so what we found is that pesticide contamination was kind of ubiquitous. 92% of plants were contaminated with at least one pesticide, but up to 11 different pesticides per plant. All in all, we found 31 different pesticide compounds throughout the city, and each contaminated plant had an average of 2.6 pesticides per plant. And I think it's also worth noting here that we surveyed the private gardeners, and they actually told us that they don't use any pesticides on their plants to manage their spaces. And so what this highlights to me is that, pesticides are really a community level issue, because we know that pesticides drift around and they don't stay where they were applied. So, this study is by no means meant to catch pesticide users where they're using it, right? The study doesn't tell us anything about where people are using them, only where those pesticides ended up. And so, sharing what we learned from this study, I also wanted to drop a note about what we still don't know about risk. So, first of all, we know where pesticides were found, like I just highlighted, but not where they were applied. We know that pesticides move around in wind and rain, maybe soil is transported. And so these results don't indicate where pesticides were applied, but only where they ended up. Second, we know that most plants that we sampled had residues from multiple different pesticides, but we don't know exactly how this translates to risk. So, chemical mixtures, where they've been studied, are known to oftentimes increase risk. But, when the Environmental Protection Agency, the US EPA, registers a pesticide, they actually look at pesticides on a single chemical basis, and they don't evaluate the effects of mixtures. When we know information about mixtures, it's from usually independent studies that happen afterwards. And so we have very little information on how those mixtures translate to risks. we know that 31 different pesticides were found throughout the city, but I think it's worth noting that the lab methods that we used couldn't capture glyphosate or pyrethroids. Now, I'm not going to expect you to remember the names of those, but that's just to note that these are two commonly used pesticides in urban areas. Glyphosate is an herbicide, and pyrethroids are a synthetic insecticide. And finally, we know levels of pesticides that harm butterflies for only a few pesticides found. But that information is just not known for the majority of pesticides out there and the majority of butterfly species. And this is because that information is not required by the EPA when we are registering pesticides. Instead, it's usually done again after market by independent academic researchers after those products are registered. And plus, most of these studies are done on a limited number of species, those that are typically easy to rear and easy to do research on, relatively easy. But New Mexico, as we learned earlier, has hundreds of butterfly species. And the reality is that we just don't know how pesticides affect the majority of the species that we have. And so, if you've made it this far, thank you for sitting through kind of the doom and gloom portion of the program. Now I'm going to transition over to the what we can do about this, because there are things that we can do to stop butterfly declines and even reverse them so that species have a chance to recover. And even though there are all of these unknowns from this study, we do know enough to take action on this issue. So I'm going to share kind of a few tips on how we can all work together to conserve butterflies. So first, a very important thing that we can all do for butterflies is continue creating more habitat in our public parks and gardens as well as at home. And this is one thing that everyone can do, whether you have a place to put a single pot on a patio or a balcony, or whether you have a space for a big garden, everyone can contribute to creating more habitat. And I also want to kind of expand what we think of as butterfly habitat, because it's not just about planting flowers. So first, butterflies need a place to lay their eggs and for those butterflies to develop, those caterpillars to develop. And these are often called host plants. And so those need to be planted in the landscape, first of all. Okay, so next, that caterpillar has developed into the flying butterflies that we often recognize. And that butterfly needs a place to eat. And so this is where those flowers come in, flowers that provide nectar for those butterflies to eat. And when we're choosing what flowers we want to plant, native ones are really important, and also native flowers that bloom throughout the year, a variety of different kinds of flowers that bloom throughout the year, so that your habitat has ideally consistent blooms all year round. And so I'll just plug that the Xerces Society also has some great pollinator-friendly plant lists on our website. So check that out if you're looking for ideas of different pollinator-friendly plants. And so lastly, butterflies also need shelter to spend the winter. And just because we don't see butterflies flying around doesn't mean that they aren't in your garden somewhere. So many butterflies actually spend the winter in their chrysalis form, which you're seeing pictured there on the far right. And they'll often build their chrysalis under a pile of leaves or attached to an old branch or a dried out stem. So it's important, even if you can't put anything in the ground, even, having an empty pot that's collecting some leaves could provide winter shelter for a butterfly. And this is just to say that butterfly habitat can really be anywhere. The sky is the limit and your imagination is the limit here. So just a few examples of places we could find butterfly habitat: public parks, schools, roadsides, places of worship, yards and gardens, maybe the common area of a neighborhood, or even on a balcony or a patio. And next, this habitat needs to be protected from pesticides in order for butterflies to be successful. And really, I think the best way to honor your investment in butterfly habitat is to protect it from pesticides, because we know that creating habitat, it's a big investment in time and in resources. And so we want to honor that investment that you're making. And again, this is really a community level effort because we know that pesticides can drift around. And so a good way to protect butterflies from pesticides is to maintain our outdoor spaces without pesticides or with the most minimal use that we can. And so this can include preventing pest problems from popping up in the first place, not using pesticides just in case or preventatively. And we would also discourage folks from using pesticides for cosmetic reasons or just because of, how an area looks that doesn't take plant health into consideration. When pests do come up, we do encourage people to use non-chemical techniques first, like, removing them by hand or maybe with a blast of water from the garden hose. And these basic principles can apply really to any landscape, including backyards and city parks. Now, if you're buying new plants from a nursery to start that butterfly habitat from scratch, we can also make sure that that habitat is protected by choosing pesticide-free plants from the nursery whenever possible. We call this buying bee-safe plants, although it applies to butterflies too. And many nurseries actually do use pesticides when they're growing their plants, even those that are attractive to butterflies. And those residues can still be on plants once you buy them and bring them home. And so it's a pretty safe bet to go with organic plants or to grow your own from seed when you can. But when that's not possible, we recommend talking to your nursery, asking them about their pest management practices, whether they use pesticides. And there are some pretty great resources also on our website for how to have this conversation with your local nursery folks, including some videos that can walk you through it, and some examples of conversation starters. And again, just plugging some more resources that we have on our website, more guidance from buying those Be Safe plants to tips on managing your habitat at home. And the final and a very important step that I'll suggest for conserving butterflies in your community is to spread the word. Talk to others about what you've learned today. So this could look like engaging with your neighbors, telling them why you plant for butterflies and why you like to keep your garden free from pesticides. This could also look like engaging with your local leaders, city councilors, exactly what you all are doing today. And finally, you can sign the Bring Back the Pollinators pledge, which that QR code on the screen will take you to. And by signing this pledge, you will join over 10,000 other people around North America who have committed to planting for pollinators, keeping that habitat safe from pesticides, and spreading the word to others. And so that's the very last tidbit that I have. And so I'd love to open it up for any questions that you all might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Do you want to maybe stop sharing screens so that we can see folks? It might help. You might have to go back and forth if you're going to have to reference the screen. Okay, that was a lot of information. I loved it. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Jacqueline? And while I'm waiting for hands to go up, I will just say, I just want to remind folks what we're doing here in Albuquerque. Couple of things for invertebrates that I'm very proud of. So just on Wednesday night, we passed legislation that protects invertebrates and fish on city open space property. Before, there was no protection for invertebrates or fish on city open space property. So very excited about that. And then just a couple years ago, we passed a resolution to support pollinator conservation efforts and to recommit to Bee City USA standards. And that was really cool because it reiterated that we're going to follow the Bee City standards, but it also said that we're no longer going to just do IPM, which is integrated pest management plans. We're going to do IPPM, which is integrated pest and pollinator management plans. And it also included a requirement to start mapping where pollinators have habitat in our city. So those are some things that we've been doing that I want to make sure everybody knows about. And then I think I see a question from Karen.
Hi, yes, my question is related to leaves in yards and leaving those leaves there. I get a ton of leaves in my yard, and I've always been someone who loves to clean them up. So how much do you need to leave to help the pollinators have a shelter in the winter? And when do you, if you clean some of them up, is there a certain time that's better to clean them up than another? Can you speak a little bit more to that?
This is a great question, and one that I probably don't have a very definitive, satisfying answer to. So leaving the leaves is definitely a practice we encourage. But others that I work with also like to emphasize or caution that if you're worried about harborage for garden pests, then maybe you want to clean up some of your leaves. So my supervisor likes to say, leave the leaves, but not near the peas because it can be harborage for some sort of pests of peas in your garden, right? I would say any amount that you're comfortable leaving is going to be beneficial for pollinators, not only pollinators, but also what we call natural enemies or insects that are going to eat pests in your garden and provide that natural pest control. So I would say it's really a matter of your comfort level. And if you'd like to clean them up in a certain area, but leave them in another area that maybe is kind of out of sight, that's great too. And so I apologize, that's not a very definitive answer.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great question, Karen. Charles, go ahead and ask your question.
I didn't hear any mention of moths, which are often confused with butterflies. Should we treat them the same?
Excellent question, Charles. Yes. The data that I spoke on about the declines was just specific to butterflies. That's not to say that moths are not maybe experiencing declines as well, but we just don't have good data on this. I think as a general principle, I'm a big supporter of the precautionary principle and not assuming that something is free from risk. And so, to your point, I would say, yes, I would love to see us, treat moths in the same way where we're using precaution and working to protect them in much the same way as butterflies, because moths are also very important pollinators. They're just, often pollinating at nighttime. There are nocturnal pollinators, and so they're not as highly visible.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Lewis.
I was wondering if you could comment on, I mean, I'm probably a fairly typical, not expert gardener, and if I have something that's severely attacking a plant, I'm likely to wander into a nursery and look around and look at a shelf of pesticides and so forth. And I'm wondering to what extent are there rules like, am I in danger of picking out a very hardcore pesticide that won't ever leave, and or are there any rules operative right now in the city of Albuquerque or the state of New Mexico that would protect me from choosing, some of the worst compounds? Or do I have to educate myself about that?
That is
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
really excellent question. So, as far as I heard you mention, picking a compound that's going to be around for a long, long time. And pesticides, depending on the specific compound, have a variety of times that they stay in the environment. And so some degrade quite quickly. So you're looking at a few hours to maybe a day where it sticks around, whereas some stay in the environment for months or even years. And so I think your best bet is to do a little bit of, a quick Google search if you see a product, if you're really concerned and you feel that you need to buy a pesticide at the garden store, look at the active ingredients. Every pesticide is required to be labeled with the active ingredient. And so if you do a quick Google search, you should be able to find the persistence time. So if you Google chemical plus persistence, it'll tell you how long that sticks around in the environment. I will say we do have a guide on common organic pesticides on our Xerces website, and I can find and drop a link to in the chat. And so those are typically going to be much less persistent in the environment than your conventional synthetic pesticides.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to that link. Yeah.
Great. Michelle Benton.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm generally a lazy gardener, so like as far as picking up leaves and stuff, I'll do it once when there's heavy leaves and let the wind blow away some. And I leave all the leaves in my flower beds.
Yeah.
And like one year when I was uncovering some things, that's beneficial for the plants too, because it protects them from the hard freeze. So that's kind of how I do my leaves. And I'm kind of cheap too, so I don't like to buy extra products or anything if I don't have to. And we don't use pesticides much at all, not at all. But I've noticed there's lots of ladybugs and praying mantis, which are natural predators for some of the bugs. So that's the method I like to use instead of pesticides. There you go.
Thank you,
Michelle,
Michelle.
thank you so much. That is awesome. I should have expected that answer from you. Edna?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to point out that soap and water are really good for removing things. My daughter had, I don't know, some sort of thing on grape leaves, and they sprayed it with soap and water. And like even maybe the leaves don't look so pretty anymore, but they still had grapes. So, I mean, there are, well, even just water, I think the slides mentioned, but soap definitely. And, yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. There's probably not a real pat answer, but how far would pesticides tend to drift? I'm sort of like happy because my neighbors aren't exactly gardeners, but they don't seem to do anything, including spray pesticides. So I'm thinking, oh, good, I'm safe. But if things drift, I mean, they could come from longer distances than we imagine. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, there's no, again, with pesticides, there's no single figure that I can say as, you know, they always will drift up to this distance. It depends on the compound. It depends on the conditions when it was applied. Was it windy outside? Was it raining or about to rain? Was it very hot outside or was it cold? I will say that we recently did a study, not in New Mexico, but elsewhere in the country, looking at mosquito sprays, not the municipal ones so much, but the private sprays. So when people hire a company to spray their yard for mosquitoes. And we did find that the majority of the time, those do unfortunately drift onto neighboring properties. And so if your neighbor does use pesticides, it might be drifting onto your yard, it might not. It just depends on the chemical and the conditions of when it was applied.
We do have a couple of questions from the chat. Susan Gorman asked, what do big yellowtail swallowtails eat, or big yellow swallowtails eat?
Yeah, that one is, so there's a few different species of big yellow swallowtails in the Albuquerque area. I know that the two-tailed swallowtail, I think, is pretty common, and that one can eat a lot of different types of host plants. It's one of those species that can survive on lots of different things, right? So while the monarch is very specific to milkweed, the big yellow swallowtails can use a lot of different things. And so chokecherry, ash, hop tree, those are a few examples of things that it can eat. There's also, I think, some evidence that it can survive on cherry, serviceberry. You know, some plants might be a little bit better hosts than others, but for the most part, it can survive on lots of different species, which is pretty cool.
Right. And Darcy asks, how long should you leave winter leaves on the ground?
Yes, there's a good guide on our website that talks about when you should essentially clean up your garden in the spring. Because we notice that a lot of people kind of hop into their springtime gardening a little early. I know I always get antsy. I'm just ready to get outside and get into the garden. And so we have this guide that, also includes when you might think about cleaning up your leaves and trimming back, those dried stems. But it really depends on where you live. And so I can find that guide and drop it in the chat too, because it's not a single date of, March 1st or April 1st. It looks at different environmental cues of, what else is happening in the landscape and when your garden might be ready as far as when those insects that have been overwintering there have already emerged and are out in the environment. And so there's no risk of kind of cleaning them up with your leaves. So I'll try to find that guide.
Awesome. Then my own personal question, neem oil, does neem oil affect butterflies? And if so, is there a better time to use it or not to control aphids?
Ooh, yes, great question. So neem oil is going to be broad spectrum. Although it's organic, it's not specific to a certain type of pest. Although, like other organic products, it's not as persistent in the environment as a synthetic. And so, I would say, if you see butterflies or caterpillars munching on a plant, I would probably not use neem oil. I would wait, if you would like to use it, I would wait until you don't see any beneficial insects in the area that are going to be affected by it.
Okay, well, that was the end of the chat question, Sean. Okay,
Yes, that
so
was the
let's
end of the chat.
go back to Karen.
Hi, another question on mosquitoes. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I do get eaten alive by mosquitoes and I'm not one who sprays for them. I do everything else that I possibly can. You can request the city not to spray in your neighborhood. And as a neighborhood rep, I'm kind of curious when on butterflies and others.
You cut out for a minute, but I think the question was around, should we be asking the city to not spray in a neighborhood or what the best approach for mosquito management is?
Yeah, what the information is around that. Sorry, I'm on the train.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. So I don't think I, can speak as much to the municipal control. I know that a lot of times municipal control is really targeted around protecting public health. And so they're going to be targeting their sprays to areas where their monitoring has shown that there is some risk of disease. That is, that spray is going to contribute to protecting public health. What I can speak a little bit more on is the residential sprays and, hiring a private company. Oftentimes those are targeting what I call nuisance mosquitoes, where, monitoring doesn't show that they're carrying disease. They're just kind of annoying, right? Folks don't like to be bitten by mosquitoes. I totally get that. But what we see with those nuisance sprays by private companies is that, they're not going to decrease your risk of getting a mosquito-borne disease. They might even contribute to insecticide resistance of mosquitoes because we're spraying them, when we don't necessarily need to be. And so what we think is a lot more effective than spraying those nuisance mosquitoes is personal protection, kind of like you've alluded to, not being outside if you're concerned during high mosquito hours, or if you do want to be outside, just wear long sleeves, long pants, some sort of insect repellent. As far as keeping them out of your house, making sure screens are intact, making sure there's no standing water around your home. Things like that are going to be way more effective for preventing mosquito bites than having it sprayed every 2 or 3 weeks, which is actually very harmful to insects.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, one more thing about when to uncover your leaves. if you ever get a chance to go to a talk by Think Like a Bee, they'll talk about all the over 1,000 different kinds of bees that are native in New Mexico. And one of those is the ground dwelling bee. And they come out after like the last freeze. So you kind of need to wait kind of late, like May 1st, to uncover the leaves. But they would know too when that happens, and they might have alerts on their website or something. I don't know.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other questions for Jacqueline? We have a few minutes left, so I do want to do like a little shout out to Michelle and Darcy and all the folks that are working over in the Altura Park, Mark Twain area. They were doing a lot of alley activation work, and along with that, they're doing pollinator gardens, and they did the very first pollinator festival this year, and it was amazing. And so I just encourage everybody to kind of follow their work and maybe try to replicate it, because I think the more pollinator gardens we get, the better we are. And so we have a rule: if we're doing any kind of work in any parks in District 7, we're putting in pollinator gardens. But we have folks in neighborhood associations that are going above and beyond and doing even more work. So thank you to Darcy and Michelle and everybody that was involved in that. And just wanted to brag a little bit so Jacqueline knows all the cool things.
It was fun, and it's Alvarado Park actually over there.
What did I say?
Said Altura.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I think it looked
from.
like Winrock put in a new pollinator garden too, so that's really pretty. I love all the pollinator gardens. Thank you, Tammy, for spearheading.
Then there's going to be, there is a really nice pollinator garden at Los Altos Park now too. They're everywhere, and there's one at Quigley Park, and there's one at Altura Park, and they're everywhere we've done work, we're putting in pollinator gardens.
And thank you to Tammy for supporting our efforts. This is Darcy from Alvarado Park. We will be having another festival. I think it's the second weekend in May, second Saturday, which Tammy is supporting us with shout outs and funding, and we really, really appreciate that.
So Jacqueline, if you happen to be back in town, let us know. We would love to take you.
And if you want to see a good demonstration garden, the garden center, the Albuquerque Garden Center near Los Altos, has great examples of native plants.
And I will, again, the Albuquerque Garden Center, I am assuming everyone knows about this really great community resource, but they are located actually on site at the Los Altos Park. And they have various plant clubs. They have folks that can talk you through any gardening questions. They are the most knowledgeable people you are ever going to find. And so get to know them and stop by. It's really a beautiful location. All right, let's go back to Valerie.
Being involved with Think Like a Bee, I'm kind of excited to hear somebody say how knowledgeable we are, but I Think Like a Bee is the kind of a parent organization going through a little bit of change. The founder is kind of stepping away, and it's going to be board run. And so we put a lot of effort into that this year. What you might be thinking more specifically of is Pollinators in the Neighborhood, PIN, who is a project of Think Like a Bee. And there will be a PIN plant giveaway at Expo at the, I'm not real sure of the details. Cynthia Cerna or the PIN website, Pollinators in the Neighborhood website, should have that information. So I think on the 20th or 21st, you can go learn more about pollinators and even get some pollinator plants. I'm not as involved with that part of the organization, but I just wanted to clarify that. We're always looking for volunteers, board members, and donations though. So, reach out if you're interested.
Yeah, the pollinator giveaway is Saturday and Sunday, the 20th and 21st from 9 to 12. And it's over at Expo. I can't remember where they're in the African Pavilion. That's a big building.
Yeah, and these giveaways are pretty generous. I think crazy generous. They give away a lot of plants, and you can get a pollinator garden started, with just what they give out.
Yeah, they describe it as a whole kit. So it's great.
And then the last resource, I just want to give Laurel a quick second. If you want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing, it's not in District 7, but it is open to all of us, and it's an amazing resource.
Thank you so much, Councilor. Yeah, we are everywhere. So we have a lot of participants in District 7 and want to get more. We provide resources to augment what the Xerces, the amazing resources they provide about habitat for all of our wild neighbors. And so I put our plant list in the chat. You can also certify your space as a backyard refuge, and that's helping us track where we have pollinator habitat. We're working with the Center for Community Geography to make a very exciting interactive mapping program to show the habitat connectivity across the area. And so we're very excited about that. And so, oops, and now I'm having background noises. But yeah, and I put both the plant list and my email in the chat. So if you want to contact me with any questions, and love to talk.
Thank you. All right, I really appreciate all the information sharing, because I think I wanted Jacqueline to know that we have folks that really care about these issues in Albuquerque, and I'm just always proud of our community when we come together to do these kinds of projects and support pollinators, and we'll do more. We'll keep going. So it is almost time to end. Is there any last comments or questions? Okay, we're going to tell Jacqueline again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate you. And thanks for giving us an hour of your time today, too.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Folks, that's the end of this month's District 7 Connection. Check out your newsletter that's coming out in 2 weeks for next month's info. And as always, reach out to me or to Sean if you have any questions or need anything in between times. Thanks.